Ryan's office revenge. You know something's wrong when the receptionist won't look you in the eye. I'm talking about that specific kind of avoidance, where they suddenly find their computer screen absolutely fascinating, like it's displaying the secrets of the universe instead of just another Excel spreadsheet. I'd barely walked through the lobby of Heartland Medical Systems when my phone buzzed. Emergency performance review. 9:30 a.m. Conference room B. No details, no explanation, just a calendar invite that felt like a punch to the gut. Let me tell you who's talking here. Daniel Cooper, 48 years old, been working in medical device sales for 22 years. Started right after I got out of the Army, where I'd learned that preparation and attention to detail can mean the difference between life and death. Built my career one hospital contract at a time, one handshake with procurement officers who'd seen every sales pitch in the book. And just 3 weeks ago, I'd closed the biggest deal in company history, an $18 million Veterans Hospital System contract that took me 14 months to put together. 14 months. That's not a typo. When you're dealing with the Department of Veterans Affairs, you're not just selling medical equipment. You're navigating a bureaucracy that makes the Pentagon look streamlined. I'd flown to Washington, D.C. 27 times, sat through procurement meetings that lasted longer than some college courses, and filled out paperwork that could have wallpapered my entire house. But I knew that world because I'd lived it. I understood how veteran administrators think, what they need, what keeps them up at night worrying about the wounded warriors coming through their doors. This wasn't just any contract either. We were providing advanced MRI systems, surgical robotics, and diagnostic equipment to 12 VA medical centers across the Southwest. Equipment that would help doctors save lives, help therapists get amputees walking again, help radiologists catch cancers early. When you've seen combat, when you've carried wounded buddies to medevac choppers, this stuff matters in ways that quarterly earnings reports never will. But here I was, getting called into a meeting like some rookie who'd screwed up his first presentation. When you've been in this business as long as I have, you develop instincts. Your gut tells you when the sharks are circling. And brother, my gut was screaming like a smoke alarm in a kitchen fire. I walked past Patricia Wells' office. The door was cracked, and I could hear her talking in that fake, concerned voice she uses when she's about to ruin someone's day. Same tone she'd used 6 months ago when she told Jerry from logistics that his position was being realigned to better serve the company's evolving needs. Corporate speak for "you're fired," but we're going to pretend it's not personal, and definitely not age-related. Patricia was our new HR director, brought in by Jonathan Stevens about a year ago. She was 42, had a compliance background from some big pharmaceutical company, and talked about modernizing our human capital strategy. What she really meant was finding creative ways to push out anyone over 45 who actually remembered when this company cared about its employees instead of just its stock options. I took the long way to the conference room. Not because I was scared. I've stared down Taliban fighters and hospital administrators, so a corporate ambush wasn't going to break me. I just wanted time to think, to read the room, see who was avoiding eye contact. Sure enough, half the people I'd mentored over the years suddenly found urgent business elsewhere when they saw me coming. Mark from technical support literally ducked into the supply closet when he saw me heading down the hall. That's when I knew for sure. So, I made a quick detour to my office and opened the locked filing cabinet. My employment contract, all 12 pages of it, including the amendments I'd negotiated 3 years ago when they'd renewed my deal, flipped to page 8. Clause 9B. The Legacy Protection Provision. Read it once, twice, ran my finger along the signatures. Jonathan Stevens, Patricia Wells, William Gardner from the board. All there, all initialed, all binding. See, 3 years ago, when they brought in Jonathan as CEO, this 38-year-old MBA who'd never actually sold anything more complex than his resume to the board, I saw the writing on the wall. He started talking about modernizing our approach and right-sizing our veteran workforce and leveraging synergies through strategic human resource optimization. Translation: he wanted to get rid of anyone over 45 who actually knew how this business worked, who had relationships that took decades to build, who understood that medical device sales isn't about PowerPoints and buzzwords. It's about trust, expertise, and being there when a surgeon needs you at 2 a.m. So, when my contract came up for renewal, I added a little insurance policy. Clause 9B specifically protected employees over 45 with more than 15 years of experience from being terminated within 30 days of completing a major contract worth more than $10 million. The language was precise, surgical even. If they tried to fire me right after a big win to avoid paying my bonus, they'd trigger a penalty clause that would make that bonus look like pocket change. Jonathan had laughed when he signed it. "Danny, you worry too much," he'd said, not even looking up from his phone. "Nobody reads all this legal stuff anyway. That's what lawyers are for." Well, somebody should have read it. I folded the contract, slipped it into my leather portfolio, and headed to conference room B. The hallway felt longer than usual, like walking down the corridor of a courthouse where you know the verdict's already been decided. When I got there, the blinds were already drawn. Never a good sign. Patricia was sitting at the table with 2 people from corporate I didn't recognize, probably brought in from headquarters to handle the dirty work. Clean-cut, expensive suits, the kind of people who specialize in delivering bad news with surgical precision. No laptops, no reports, no performance metrics spread across the table. Just execution papers waiting for a signature. The room smelled like fear and cheap coffee. "Daniel," Patricia said, with that same fake smile she'd been practicing in the mirror since she got here. "Thanks for coming on such short notice." "Always happy to make time for the team," I said, staying on my feet. Nobody offered me a chair anyway, which told me everything I needed to know about how this was going to go. She gestured to a single sheet of paper on the table. I'd bet my army pension it was my termination notice, probably printed 20 minutes ago on company letterhead. "I'll cut right to the chase. We're restructuring the business development division. Unfortunately, your position is being eliminated effective immediately." I nodded slowly. No drama, no shouting, just took a breath and said, "I understand." She blinked, probably expecting me to beg or argue or demand to speak to Jonathan. Poor woman had no idea what she'd just walked into. The corporate people shifted in their seats like they were disappointed they wouldn't get to see a breakdown. "This is purely a business decision," one of the suits added. Like that made it better. "Nothing personal. The company is moving in a new direction." "Of course," I said. "Business is business." Patricia looked relieved. "We'll need your badge and company phone." I handed them over without a word, along with my parking pass and building access card. Just like that, Daniel Cooper was no longer an employee of Heartland Medical Systems. 22 years of service, $18 million in new business, and they walked me out like I was stealing office supplies. Except that wasn't quite true yet. Because what Patricia and Jonathan and their corporate cleanup crew didn't realize, what they'd never bothered to understand, was that firing me 23 days after I'd closed the veterans contract didn't save them my $2.5 million bonus. It triggered something much, much more expensive. I left that conference room like I was heading to lunch. Calm, collected, like getting fired was just another item checked off my to-do list. Patricia stayed behind, probably already planning how to spin this to the rest of the team. The corporate people just sat there like mannequins, waiting for their next assignment, their next career to dismantle in the name of efficiency. But instead of heading for the parking garage like they expected, I took the elevator up to Legal and Compliance on the 6th floor. I'd spent enough time up there during the veterans' contract negotiations to know the layout, know who still had some integrity left in this corporate wasteland. Ryan Walsh, our general counsel, was old school, 51 years old, been with the company since before Jonathan was out of business school, back when handshake deals still meant something. Ryan's assistant barely looked up when I dropped my portfolio on her desk with just enough force to get her attention. "Tell him Daniel Cooper needs to see him. He'll want to take this meeting." She started to say something about appointments and schedules, but I just stood there with the kind of patient silence I'd learned in the military. Sometimes you don't need words to communicate urgency. 10 minutes later, I was in Ryan's office with the door closed and the blinds drawn. He gave me that look. The one that said he already knew what had happened, but hoped to God he was wrong. "They let you go?" he asked, loosening his tie like the room had suddenly gotten warmer. Effective immediately. No cause cited, no severance beyond standard. 23 days after I closed the biggest contract in company history. I paused, watching his face. No mention of the legacy protection provision. Ryan's eyebrows went up like someone had just told him the building was on fire. Which clause exactly? I opened the portfolio and handed him the contract, already turned to the right page. Clause 9B, Section 3. The Veteran Protection Amendment we negotiated during my renewal 3 years ago. He read it once, then again slower, his lawyer's brain processing the implications. I watched his face change as he realized what they'd done, what they'd triggered without even knowing it. His complexion went from normal to pale to something approaching green. "Daniel," he said quietly, like he was breaking bad news to a terminal patient. "This clause is ironclad, airtight. If they terminated you within 30 days of completing a major contract without documented cause, they owe you the full bonus plus 50% of your base salary plus continuation of benefits for 18 months. That's right. And it wasn't just Jonathan who signed off on this. Patricia knew about it too. She was in the meeting when we finalized the veteran hiring protections. I've got the meeting minutes, the email trail, everything. Ryan leaned back in his chair and let out a low whistle, the kind you make when you see a car accident about to happen but can't do anything to stop it. They thought they could avoid the payout by firing you before the bonus vested. They didn't realize the clause activates because of the termination, not despite it. The best part? I explained this exact scenario to Jonathan when he signed it. Asked him what would happen if someone tried to fire a veteran employee right after a big win just to avoid paying bonuses. He shrugged and said, "That's what lawyers are for. We'll cross that bridge if we ever come to it." Ryan was already reaching for his phone. Well, congratulations. They just burned that bridge down with themselves standing on it. Ryan didn't say much after that revelation, just made copies of everything, scanned the documents into his secure system, and promised to escalate it through proper channels. As I stood to leave, I said, "Don't worry about picking sides on this one, Ryan. The wrong side was the betting against someone who actually reads his contracts. But I wasn't done yet. I had one more stop to make before this thing really got rolling. I made my way down to compliance, where Linda Martinez had been quietly doing her job for 15 years. Linda was the kind of person every company needs, but never appreciates. Someone who actually understands that compliance isn't about checking boxes, it's about protecting people from their own stupidity. I found her at her desk, hunched over reports that probably showed exactly how much money they thought they'd save by cutting expensive veteran employees like me. She looked up when I dropped a copy of my contract file on her desk. "Linda, I need you to look at something. Clause 9B documentation. Original signatures. Amendment history. Implementation timeline." She glanced up, confused. Then her eyes widened as she recognized me. "Daniel, didn't you just get terminated?" "Yes. 23 days after completing the $18 million veterans contract, 1 week short of the 30-day protection window." I kept my voice level, matter of fact. Linda opened the file slowly, like it might explode in her hands. When she got to Clause 9b, she stopped reading and looked up at me with something between horror and admiration. This language. It's surgical. Precise. I wrote it while recovering from knee surgery 3 years ago. Had plenty of time to think about worst-case scenarios, about what would happen if some hotshot MBA decided that experience was just another line item to be optimized. She was already reaching for her phone. "I need to flag this for the compliance committee immediately. You might want to run it up the ladder fast," I said, leaning closer. "Because if they try to bury this or make it disappear, there are backups in 3 different locations with timestamps that prove exactly when everyone was notified. I learned in the Army that you never go into battle with just one plan." Linda's face went pale. She understood exactly what I was telling her. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about a company that had just stepped on a legal landmine while blindfolded. I left Heartland Medical that day with my head held high. Not angry, not bitter, just satisfied that 22 years of experience had taught me to always have an exit strategy. By the time I got to my truck in the parking garage, my phone was already buzzing with messages from colleagues who'd heard the news through the grapevine. But the real fireworks were just getting started upstairs. Within an hour, Patricia stormed into the executive conference room like someone had lit her hair on fire. Jonathan was already there with Charles Hoffman and William Gardner from the board, probably planning their next round of cost-cutting measures, congratulating themselves on how clever they'd been. "We have a problem," she announced, slamming my termination paperwork on the mahogany table hard enough to make everyone's coffee cups jump. A big one. William Gardner, the board chair, looked up from his tablet with that expression rich people get when someone interrupts their important thoughts. "What kind of problem, Patricia? Daniel Cooper's contract has a protection clause. Clause 9b. It triggers an accelerated payout if we terminate anyone over 45 with long tenure within 30 days of completing a major contract." The room went so silent you could hear the ventilation system humming. Jonathan's face went through several interesting shades of pale, like someone watching their stock portfolio crash in real time. "Wait," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "We fired him 23 days after the veterans contract. That was the whole point, to avoid the bonus payout." That's when Ryan Walsh walked into the room carrying his own copy of my contract, looking like a man who'd just been asked to perform surgery with a butter knife. "You didn't avoid anything. You activated it. The clause doesn't just cover the vesting period, it protects against exactly this kind of maneuver." Charles Hoffman leaned forward, and I imagine his next words came out very carefully. "What's the financial exposure here?" Ryan consulted his notes with the careful precision of a bomb disposal technician. Standard bonus was $2.5 million. The protection clause adds a multiplier for wrongful termination within the protected window, plus 50% of base salary, plus benefits continuation, plus potential damages if he decides to pursue arbitration. Jonathan stood up so fast, his leather chair rolled backward and hit the wall. "How much are we talking about?" "Roughly $3.8 million, Ryan said. "And that's assuming he doesn't decide to make this a public relations nightmare or pursue additional damages for age discrimination." The silence that followed was the kind you get in emergency rooms when someone flatlines. Then Patricia tried one last desperate play, like a poker player going all in with a pair of twos. "Can we claim he violated company policy? Create some retroactive justification for the termination?" Ryan shook his head like she'd just asked him to fake his own death. His record is spotless. 22 years, never a formal complaint, never a disciplinary action. He's got commendation letters from hospital administrators across 3 states. If we try to fabricate cause now, he'll destroy us in court, and every employment lawyer in the country will be lining up to represent him pro bono just for the publicity. That's when William Gardner asked the question that would haunt Jonathan's dreams. Did you read the contract before you signed it? Nobody reads all that legal language, Jonathan protested. That's what the legal department is for. Ryan's voice was ice cold. The legal department flagged this clause when it was added. You overruled our recommendation for a thorough review because you wanted to fast-track the contract renewal. The wolves weren't just howling anymore. They were inside the building. 3 days later, my lawyer called with news. That didn't surprise me one bit. The settlement offer had come through faster than a medical emergency. Full payout of $3.8 million, plus benefits continuation for 18 months, plus a very generous non-disclosure agreement that came with its own separate payment just for keeping my mouth shut about the whole mess. They're not admitting wrongdoing, my lawyer explained over the phone, but they're very, very eager to make this go away quietly. I could understand why. Word travels fast in the medical device industry, especially when it involves someone getting fired right after landing an $18 million government contract. Hospital administrators talk to each other, and they remember things like loyalty and competence. They also remember companies that throw away their best people for no good reason. I signed the settlement agreement and deposited the check the same day. The first thing I did was call my daughter Sarah at medical school. Honey, we need to talk about your tuition situation. Dad, I told you, I can handle the loans. Not anymore. You can't. Your education's paid for. Focus on becoming the best doctor you can be. The silence on the other end of the phone lasted about 10 seconds before I heard her crying. Good tears, the kind that come when a massive weight gets lifted off your shoulders. Next call was to my son Michael at engineering school. Same conversation. Same result. Kids shouldn't have to choose between following their dreams and drowning in debt. Not when their old man just got handed the means to fix it. But the call that mattered most was to my mother's oncologist. Dr. Williams, it's Daniel Cooper. I want to discuss upgrading my mother's treatment plan. Money's no longer an object. That conversation lasted an hour. By the end of it, she was scheduled for a new experimental therapy that insurance would never have covered. The kind of treatment that might give her not just more time, but good time. Quality time. 2 weeks later, the corporate bloodbath began in earnest. Jonathan Stevens was reassigned to a strategic advisory role, which is corporate speak for being put in a windowless office with no staff, no budget, and no real authority. They couldn't fire him outright without making the whole situation look even worse, but they could make him irrelevant. I heard through the grapevine that his new business cards listed his title as Executive Consultant, Strategic Initiatives. Fancy way of saying expensive placeholder with no actual job. Patricia Wells lasted another month before she decided to pursue new opportunities in human resource consulting. Translation, they threw her under the bus to save what was left of their reputation, and she was lucky to get a reference letter that didn't mention the $3.8 million mistake she'd helped orchestrate. 6 months later, I was sitting in the executive offices of Advanced Medical Technologies, Heartland's biggest competitor, signing papers as their new Senior VP of Strategic Accounts. Word travels fast in this industry, especially when someone outplays the corporate playbook as spectacularly as I had. They didn't just want to hire me. They wanted to learn from me. We've been trying to break into the VA system for years, their CEO told me during the interview. We need someone who understands that world, who has those relationships. I did understand that world. I'd built those relationships one conversation at a time, one problem solved at a time, over 2 decades of showing up when it mattered. You can't fake that kind of credibility, and you sure can't replace it with a PowerPoint presentation. The office they gave me had windows overlooking the city, a view that reminded me every day that there are companies out there that still value experience over youth, relationships over algorithms, wisdom over whatever's trending on LinkedIn this week. A year later, I ran into William Gardner, the board chair from Heartland, at a medical conference in Chicago. He looked older, more tired, like a man who'd learned some expensive lessons about reading contracts. "Daniel," he said, extending his hand with the careful respect you show to someone who's outsmarted you completely. "How are you settling in at Advanced Medical?" "Can't complain," I said. "Just closed a $25 million contract with the Navy medical system. Turns out, institutional knowledge is still worth something." He winced slightly. "About what happened at Heartland?" "Ancient history, Bill. You learn from your mistakes and move on. That's what professionals do." What I didn't tell him was that Advanced Medical had promoted me to Executive VP just last month, with equity options that would make my old Heartland bonus look like tip money. They'd also asked me to head up a new division focused specifically on government contracts, military hospitals, VA medical centers, the kind of complex deals that require someone who speaks the language and understands the mission. The funny thing is, I never wanted revenge. I just wanted what I'd earned through 2 decades of showing up every day, building relationships that mattered, and getting results when it counted. But Jonathan and Patricia made the classic mistake that's destroying corporate America. They confused age with obsolescence, experience with expense, and loyalty with liability. 22 years in medical device sales taught me that loyalty has to flow both ways. When companies forget that lesson, they pay the price in more than just money. They lose institutional knowledge that takes decades to build and can disappear in a single bad decision. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't proving you're right. It's watching them realize exactly how wrong they were to bet against someone who knows the difference between playing the game and understanding it. Experience isn't just about knowing how to close deals. It's about knowing how to protect yourself when the people you trusted decide you're expendable, and having the wisdom to turn their mistake into your greatest opportunity.